When I first got here with Stephanie, my girlfriend from California a couple months ago, I really didn't know any of this history of Patterson. She might have. She's smart on these things. But the first couple days we got here, we were treated to a walk-through tour of Patterson by our next speaker, Bob Wesser. And it really brought alive what the history of the United States was and what the crucial theme is in Diane's campaign for Congress. So please join me in welcoming Bob.
Yeah. Okay, I hope everybody has their mental seatbelts on because we're going to go through a lot of history here, about 300 years in 20 minutes or something. Not quite, but anyway. But just quickly, nobody knows this outside of the people here generally that live here. This is like, walking through the ancient ruins of Greece or something. I mean, when I first came here in the early 90s or mid-90s, I was just astonished. And it's kind of all buried and you feel like you're sifting through ruins. But what I want to do is locate, because this is a very lawful development in a whole span of history that develops this nation and republic. And I want to introduce this to you, because it's really the battles that we're fighting today are hundreds of years old. And we're bringing back something that we haven't seen, as Diane was saying, at least minimally since Kennedy. And I want to start with two very short film clips to give you a simple idea of what we're looking at in terms of the contrast of two completely different systems. One being the way the British Empire worked, and it works in a different way now, but it's the same principle. And then on the other side, the American system.
Destroying the southern United States was a critical part of a worldwide British economic system to which Adam Smith gave the name free trade. Beginning in West Africa, the British East India Company, Royal Africa Company, and others captured slaves. These slaves were shipped to the Western Hemisphere to create the slave plantation system of the southern United States. The principal product of this system in the 19th century was cotton, 75% of which was exported to England. Here, English peasants worked for shillings to turn the cotton into low-quality textiles, which were then sold in India, the crown jewel of the empire. The Indian subjects, denied the right by the British to produce for themselves, paid for the textiles with opium crops. The Indian opium was then shipped from India to China, where it was forced on the Chinese people for enormous profit, addicting millions to the life-sucking drug. The profits from this cycle, characterized by East India Company lackey Adam Smith as buying cheap and selling dear, was the foundation of the empire's existence. An interruption of any one part was an interruption to the whole.
In the post-colonial United States Republic, however, there existed a better vision for the future. American system economist and advisor to President Abraham Lincoln, Henry C. Carey, drew a stark contrast when he wrote in 1851,
"Two systems are before the world. One looks to underworking the Hindu and sinking the rest of the world to his level. The other to raising the standard of man throughout the world to our level. One looks to pauperism, ignorance, depopulation, and barbarism. The other to increasing wealth, comfort, intelligence, and civilization. One looks towards universal war, the other towards universal peace. One is the English system, the other we may be proud to call the American system, for it is the only one ever devised, the tendency of which was that of elevating while equalizing the condition of man throughout the world. Such is the true mission of the people of these United States. To raise the value of labor throughout the world, we need only to raise the value of our own."
So that's pretty stark, right? It's buy cheap, sell dear, or sell dear. That's the, make money no matter what, versus this last sentence here. And even though it's a little bit later than the period that we're looking at, it's exactly the same principle, because we had to create a form of society that actually could foster that development. Now, this doesn't come from nowhere. The first sovereign government to do this was actually in 1629, right here in Massachusetts. And I don't know if anybody's ever been to Saugus, Massachusetts, where they have the Saugus Iron Works. This is absolutely astounding. There's nothing like it anywhere in the world. It's a little industrial complex. This is 1630, 1635, where you have the foundry, you have the rolling mill, you have the nail mill. It's all together as one complex. And one of the reasons that this was able to occur is we had public credit. This is 1635, 1640. And that's it right there, the Pine Tree Shilling. So the Massachusetts Bay Colony issued its own coinage and credit, which allowed these principles that Diane was going through to occur. So this is 1630, 150 years approximately before the American Revolution. And one of the ways that they did it was somewhat of a coup, because they got Charles I to sign the charter, and then they brought the charter over here with them. So they could actually elect their own government. They were not beholden to anybody in Parliament. This didn't last, by the way, forever. I mean, once the Crown got an idea what was going on, they moved to crush the entire enterprise, which is a whole other story in and of itself. But that's the beginnings right here in Massachusetts. And this is a battle that rages. This is picked up. Those are the Winthrops that I showed you, John Winthrop Jr. and Sr. John Winthrop Jr. went on to extend this whole process into Connecticut with the Connecticut River Colony. And, by the way, Eastern Long Island. In case you wonder where all these places like Southampton and Southold come from, they were actually part of the Connecticut River Colony with this principle in the 17th century. This was picked up by the Mathers. Cotton and Increase Mather out of Boston picked up this whole tradition, and it was an intense battle. And their protege, they recruited at a very young age, was a man named Benjamin Franklin, who, of course, was born in Boston, all right? And the Mathers told him at a certain point, look, they're ruining us here. They're ripping us apart. They got onto us. Get out of here and go somewhere else and keep the thing going. And that's exactly what he did. He went to Philadelphia. And I put this up because this is the issue, right? The American Prometheus. Everybody knows the story of Prometheus. Prometheus' great crime is he gives the power of fire to mankind, who was otherwise living in darkness and wretchedness, etc. The power of fire, this idea that Diane was talking in modern terms, we say energy flux density, but it's the power of science. And that's a painting of Franklin. We'll come back to that. But anyway, this is what Franklin does do. He sets up his printing operation. It's about 1740. And this thing on the lower left is the center of the whole enterprise, the American Philosophical Society, established by him and others in 1743. And the idea of this is it's going to be a fulcrum of the most advanced scientific ideas on the planet, not just here, but England, France, etc. There's obviously limits in terms of communications. And he gathers around him people who are committed to this enterprise to bring this Promethean idea into being. Remember, we're still colonies of the Crown, but it's a long way away. So there's a limit in terms of what influence and control they can have over us. That's his book on the experiments of electricity. That thing there looks like a banjo. It's called the Banjo Barometer. It's a barometer, because this is what he's interested in. How can we know what the weather is going to be? How can we control it? Do we know this beforehand? These are the Leyden jars. They're jars that contain static electricity. Actually, we'll get to this because this is always the fun part, By the way, on the left is one of the most accurate engravings I've seen of this, which actually shows the experiment, because he didn't just go out there in a lightning storm and throw a kite up and say, hey, see what's going to happen. I mean, that would be pretty fatal. But he obviously waited for intense atmospheric turbulence, because he knew what was going on is you had static electricity. And the idea was to capture the static electricity and put it in the little Leyden jar there, which he's holding in his hand. The key was just to see if he had some electricity, some static, electricity coming down. That's why he had the key on there. So if you get the lightning starts, you get out of there. Okay, that's not the idea. But what came out of this, as a side thing, really, was this invention of the lightning rod. And this is a big deal, because before the lightning rod, people were absolutely terrorized by lightning. It was completely unknowable when it was going to hit, where it was going to hit. You had no control over it. And the funny thing is, it had the tendency to hit churches because of big steeples. So this is kind of embarrassing, because there was all sorts of superstitions. And if you got hit by lightning, there must have been some horrible thing you did, to offend God, etc. And once he discovered this lightning rod, and he was absolutely committed to the idea of making this a public discovery. Everybody could use it afterwards. At that point, people were no longer petrified by this. So here for centuries and centuries, it was an absolutely terrifying millennium. Power of nature was all of a sudden able to be channeled and that's Prometheus. Isn't that neat, that picture? That's obviously the Empire State Building, capturing a bolt of lightning. How do you like that? Right? Nobody inside died. So I just going to reference this briefly because, of course, the big problem we are on a continent. We're not just in a little border along the Atlantic Ocean. And the idea the whole time was, how are we going to bring this across the entire continent? We're going to create, this is a very ambitious project. And, of course, one of the things that you run into as a problem in this is there is a natural barrier between the coastal regions of the United States and North America and the interior, which is, of course, the Appalachian Mountain chain. But within it, there's various breaches and valleys that you can get through the other side, and they're all listed there. We won't go through the details of that. But that was the mission of the young George Washington in Virginia, working with other elements, Lord Fairfax. In fact, there's a whole book here that we wrote, that Graham Lowry wrote. We published this some years ago, called How the Nation Was Won, which is absolutely phenomenal. It's out of print, but you can get it online on my little rinky-dink website, the whole PDF of it. And it tells the whole story. It's extraordinary. And that's what he was doing with the surveying, right? Is to get us into the interior, get us developing the continent from the inside, or on the inside. Just a little local angle here, a simple thing, right? This is New York. This is the United States. This is New York City. Here. So if you're going to go New York City inland, how do you do it? All right? There's only a couple of pathways. You go up the Hudson, over the Mohawk Valley. That, of course, later becomes the Erie Canal. You get to the other side of the mountains and you're in the interior of the Great Lakes. Or you go across New Jersey to either the Lehigh Valley or the Lebanon Valley. And so, therefore, New Jersey becomes, in terms of this project, I call it a land bridge into the West. And this has and we'll see this later on, very important ramifications for what happens right here. This is Franklin's flag or symbol from 1754. This is during the 7 Years' War, French and Indian War. And, of course, he's trying to use this to unify all the colonies. Because this is always the idea. How can we actually create some form of a nation that will be committed to this idea? And, of course, it's join or die, right? That doesn't happen. It fails for reasons we won't go into here. That's also, I think, covered somewhat in this book, at the end of it. Anyway, in the middle of this entire whole Franklin project, right, almost exactly the same time as that little flag we just saw, is born a young fellow in the middle of nowhere. I hope there's nobody from the Caribbean here because they'll get insulted. But anyway, in the island of Nevis. I'm told that they pronounce it Nevis. I always said Nevis, but apparently they say Nevis. Anyway, and that's this young fellow here, Alexander Hamilton, who's born, as Diane said, either in 1755 or 57, who knows, right? And that's where he was born. He wasn't born in that thing that was built later. The house he was born in actually was destroyed by an earthquake. How do you like that? 1840. But this is an exceptional story because his mother, Rachel Fawcett Levine, is an extraordinary woman, right? Gets caught up in a forced marriage to a real creep, a rich creep, right, who abused her. And she says she has to get out of it. She has Alexander by that time, and they leave him, or she doesn't have that. Anyway, she leaves him and links up with Hamilton's father, James Hamilton, but she can't get a divorce to this guy because it would be too embarrassing for him because he's a big oligarch. So Hamilton is born out of wedlock. He's a bastard. Okay, so you have this bastard kid born in the middle of nowhere, right? So what happens is Franklin has a really extraordinary guy. He has a whole intelligence operation that he runs throughout North America and into Europe. And one of the principal ways that he gathers intelligence is they have American missionaries, Christian missionaries, who go into these various areas. And there's a young fellow named Hugh Knox, who was from Scotland, who was recruited into the American Philosophical Society and the Franklin Junto crowd in the early 1750s, right? And he is for whatever reason, maybe because he knew various languages, he knew French or whatever, he's sent down to the Caribbean, first to the Danish island, then later to St. Croix. And by that time, the Hamilton and his mother and father had moved to St. Croix. And he meets this exceptional young man, and he immediately takes him under his wing and opens his entire library to this kid, who's 12 years old. Depends on what you read. It could have been 8, could have been 12. I haven't seen conclusive evidence in either of them. But anyway, but look at this. This is what he does in his leisure time. This is this 14-year-old, 12, 13-year-old kid. What's he doing? He's not playing Grand Theft Auto, I'll tell you that. Okay, he's reading Plutarch, Shakespeare, Milton, Plato, Pope, all the other English poets, other Greek philosophers, and several histories of England and Europe. And I've seen his later reading list from when he was in King's College, Columbia, and it's quite impressive. A lot of ancient history. He knew this stuff inside and out. In 1772, this is what Diane was referencing, one or two, whenever it was, there's a big hurricane that rips through St. Croix, and Hamilton, when he's 14, 15, 16 years old, he writes a pamphlet, which is basically an anti-slavery tract. And he uses the occasion of this horrific act of nature to say, hey, you're being delivered a message, right? The rich must succor the miserable. Those who revel in affluence have to see the afflictions of humanity. Bestow your superfluity to ease them. And then he basically says in this document, I've seen the crimes that you people have committed in terms of the abuse of slavery. I'm a witness to this. And Hugh Knox uses this to go around and raise money in St. Croix and say, hey, this guy's got to be sent into the mainland. We need this guy, and they do. And he's sent to the home of Elias Boudinot III, who's also part of this Franklin Junto crowd, American Philosophical Society. He's the first postmaster of Princeton in 1750 something or another. He has a son, Elias Boudinot IV, who will become extremely critical later in the development of Patterson. And Elias becomes Hamilton's tutor. So he's introduced to the entire terrain of what's actually been going on here, as well as, Latin, Greek, etc. And then he's sent off to King's College, otherwise known today as Columbia University. But the point is, he has this passion, and it's deeply, deeply rooted in ancient history. This has never been done before. Nobody has created a form of nation which can secure this image of a human being. It hasn't been done. Greeks, they tried it, it failed, etc. So he knows this stuff, so he's going to do this. This is going to be what his life is going to be. He makes all these decisions at 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. Of course, you have the Declaration of Independence, which we know. I just want to highlight one thing. It's a pretty radical document, that we're absolving from all allegiance to the British Crown and all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain, then the colony, our states, ought to be totally dissolved. And political connections means economic connections. All right? Break. It's a total break. We don't recognize their banks. We don't recognize their money. We don't recognize their laws. Nothing. Right? So that's a pretty strong injunction, if you think about it. And it has to be created. Right? It's not going to just happen. So Hamilton, of course, has made the aide-de-camp, because he's so extraordinary, to Washington at 19 years old. There he is. He's a captain of the artillery. And before the war is even over, a few months before Yorktown, he writes a series of letters. Now, the thing that Diane was referring to was even earlier than that. as you saw, right? It's before the war, before the Declaration, yeah. But this is a more development of the ideas of the same thing. It's called the Continentalist. It's a series of letters, I forget what it is, 5 or 6 or something like this, that are published in the New York Packet, which is a newspaper in New York City. And the last letter, they all do, but it's all how are we going to unify these states? Hey, this has to function, and it's not right now. The spirits of our people are high, everybody's unified, but we're a mess. We're in debt, the states don't get along, so obviously we're doing something wrong, right? And he says what we're doing wrong is we don't control our own economy. We don't control our own trade. This is what we must address. Again, this is before the revolution is even won. And this is what he is completely preoccupied with. I just saw this today. There's a little painting. I'd never seen that before of this scene. Before that, I guess it was in 1778. It depends on who you talk to. And a lot of this, I think, is just kind of a legend, but I like it. So, yeah. But he had stumbled across this beautiful scene, which they called the Great Falls of Totowa. All right? Totowa is obviously an Indian name. And supposedly it was he in Washington. This shows he in Washington. And other people say Lafayette. But they spot this, and what goes through Hamilton's mind is, my God, this is the place where I'm going to build my model city for in an industrial city. And so this, again, this is why we're in the middle of all the fighting and, et cetera. But he decides at that point, this is the place that it's going to be. Because we can use the power of this water. Yeah, anyway. For people that don't know the geography, this is, of course, the Passaic River. And it's navigable up to the Great Falls. And you can't go any further unless you do portage or whatever. So those, whatever you do here then can be transported down to the New York Bay, etc. Does anybody know what that is? Thought somebody might, but this is neat. This is the first movie ever made of the Great Falls by Thomas Edison. Isn't that awesome, huh? This is like 1901 or something. It's on the website of the group the nonprofit that's now fighting to get Patterson as a National Historic Park. That's where I found it. All right, so anyway, so the war is over. The Articles of Confederation ain't doing the job. So what does Hamilton do? He launches a total offensive publicly to get New York State, in this case, because he's in New York, to ratify the Constitution of the United States that they come up with at the Constitutional Convention. And he writes, of course, the Federalist Papers, probably of which 2/3 are written by him, the others Madison and Jay. But what's really neat about this is that if you lived in New York City, 2 or 3 times a week, you picked up either the New York Packet here, or I forget there was 2 other ones, the Independent, the Gazette, or whatever, and you would read one of these papers. There's one right here, right? To the public, blah, 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 blah. They were always signed Publius, because they didn't say their names for whatever reason. And this is really in the publishing of this later, which kind of laid the basis for the public support of the Constitution, and just went through every kind of avenue on how this actually could be done and what had to be done to do it. Obviously, people should read that if they can. It's good reading. Anyway, this is the inauguration of Washington. So this is under the Constitution, which is ratified, of course. And there's Hamilton. That's Hamilton. He's appointed as the first Treasury Secretary. And that's the whole cabinet there. And what he does is Diane was referencing, he immediately writes 5 reports as the first Treasury Secretary, which really is the foundation of the American system of economy, which has never been rivaled. It's been enhanced and improved upon, but it's the basis of the whole thing. The report on credit, which you heard some sections of in terms of why that's necessary, public credit, on duties and imports, which is really the idea of tariffs to protect the development of our industry, another report on credit, establishment of mint, and this report on manufacturers. And anyway, this is the vast extension given by late improvements in the employment of machines. Substituting the agency of fire and water has prodigiously lessened the necessity for manual labor. And he goes on to say what Diane was referencing, as soon as people find out about this, they're going to be flooding in here from all over the world, right? Because they don't have to work like beasts. They can use their minds. We can invent new machineries, new technology, etc. But again, think of the Massachusetts Bay Colony in terms of this idea of public credit. Right? And now, after the revolution, we actually have the basis to form a government, a power in the world to represent this idea for the first time in the known written history of mankind. That's the quote on the left that Diane read about the idea of cherishing and stimulating the activity of the human mind. The quote on the right is from Adam Smith's theory of moral sentiments, where he says basically, forget the human mind, forget it, right? To man is allotted a much humbler department. Nature's directed us to the greater part of these by original and immediate instincts. Hunger, thirst, passion which unites the two sexes, the love of pleasure and the dread of pain prompt us to apply those means for their own sakes and without any consideration of their tendency to those beneficent ends which the great director of nature intended to produce by them. Okay, that's Zeus saying to Prometheus, you have no right to give fire to mankind. I'm going to chain you to a rock and eat your liver out every day, which is what his punishment was. So you see two completely radically different ideas of what a human being is, what a political system is, what economy is. And of course, as you saw in the little movie clip, this is the propagandist for the British free trade system, which is just a global slave empire. And then, of course, what he references in the report, which everybody in Patterson always cites because it's neat, it's right in there, right, is that toward this end, a society is now forming with a capital which is expected to be extended to at least $500,000, on behalf of which measures are already in train for prosecuting on a large scale the making and printing of cotton goods. So at that point we had no textile industry. We imported all the textiles from Britain, so you can't have a clear political break with the empire if you're doing that, right? You see who's involved in the creation of this. This starts in 1790 and 1791, as you know, when he's right there as the Treasury Secretary. They begin this Patterson project immediately. And who's involved? It's all the inside guys of the Revolution, of the Continental Army. So it's Hamilton, it's Schuyler, his father-in-law, who was a critical guy. He was basically Washington's northeastern intelligence guy, big advocate of the Erie Canal to get into the interior. Boudinot IV, who was Hamilton's tutor, who was Washington's commissary of prisoners. You know what that means, right? When you capture a British soldier or officer, intelligence, right? So he was Washington's key counterintelligence guy. That's what he ended up being. So he's an insider in the creation of society for the promotion of useful manufacturers here in Patterson. William Dewar, what can you say about the poor guy? He was the first deputy secretary of the treasurer. He got wrapped up in a whole speculative scam trying to get money. He ended up being thrown in jail. Anyway, he was involved in at least trying to do this. William Paterson, really important guy. Governor William Paterson. He was the Attorney General, okay, under the new revolutionary government here in New Jersey during the Revolution, and he was a SOB against the enemy. The stuff this guy did was extraordinary. He was ruthless in smoking out Tories and prosecuting traitors and the whole thing. And he was one of the New Jersey representatives to the Continental Convention. So anyway, supposedly Patterson is named after him. So he's involved in it. Lafayette is kind of the French connection of the whole thing. Peter Colt, who is also a very important guy, comes out of also work in the Caribbean, knows French because of it, becomes Washington's one of the key liaisons with the French army and officers. He's convinced by Boudinot to leave Connecticut, where he's the first treasurer, and come here and be part of the Patterson project. That's not Peter Colt. I can't find a picture of Peter Colt anywhere. That's his son Roswell Colt, who's absolutely critical to this Patterson thing, right? And then we have, of course, Pierre Charles L'Enfant, right? The young dandy, quite brilliant, obviously, designer, architect of Washington, D.C. in terms of the plan. And he's here to design the city of Patterson and we'll go to this here, actually, because this is quite important. And Hamilton's idea is this, okay? We're going to have two cities that are federal cities in the United States today. One is Washington, D.C., because that's the center of the government, and that reflects the Constitution of the country. The other one is going to be Paterson, because that's going to be the model for the economy and the development of the economy. And is Nick still here? He's not here. Nick Sunday? Okay, he had to leave, I think. He had to leave? Okay. Nick Sunday from Patterson here has done an extraordinary amount of work on this. He's actually done archaeological findings in Patterson. And basically this plan did in some way go into effect. In Washington, D.C., you kind of have two holes around which the design is created. The Capitol here, there, and the White House. Capitol, White House, right? And you have these kind of... And you have the same thing with Patterson. Right. This is the Great Falls area, which became the center of kind of the economic development side of it, which is the Colt gun mill. And this later became the mansion of Roswell Colt, but it was a high ground. This was the idea for L'Enfant was some kind of government building, and then you create this geometry around it. So isn't that fascinating, right? So that was Hamilton's idea. Never happened, right? And for people that are not familiar with it, the way this works is in terms of the raceways. This is the Passaic River. This is the falls right over here. And you make a little dam here, and it's tremendous power of water, force of water, obviously. Channel into a reservoir, and you create a race. If anybody knows anything about milling, the channel that leads to the water wheel, whether it's a wooden one or an earthen one, is called a race. They call it a race. So that's where you get the idea of a raceway, and then you have mills here and textiles or whatever. The first mill is right away 1792. It's all it was, just a conversion back into the river. This is one of the raceways today. That's the top of the falls there. And all right. Anyway, so the whole thing is Diane referenced. If you're the enemy, the empire and their system in London and their allies, and you don't want this. This is the last thing, because you lose your whole. Remember that little thing at the end of the film where the narrator said, you take one little chunk out of this chain of the slave empire and the whole thing collapses. And that's what we were threatening to do. We're just going to take one chain out. We're going to break the whole chain up completely, right? And so it's total war. It's complete war. And you got to realize that by 1800, Franklin's long dead. George Washington's dead. The kind of internal creative leadership of the revolution and the whole mission is gone. The only one left is Hamilton. And the British and their allies in the United States moved to crush this whole thing, led by these two guys. Gallatin, who's a Swiss banker, right, who brought over him. Back, everybody complains about, Obama and the birth certificate. This guy, forget about it. He faked the whole thing. He couldn't possibly legally be a senator. He becomes a senator from Pennsylvania, so he can lead the risky rebellion against Washington and Hamilton and try to bring down the federal government. And then he later becomes the treasurer, secretary of the Treasury. And from that position, just rips apart all of Hamilton's project. Burr is his ally, who's a lawyer. And, of course, everybody knows what happens in 1804 is Burr kills Hamilton over here in Weehawken. Everybody has a different theory about that, but I'm not going to go into that now. But the point is Hamilton's dead. And look at this. This is awesome, right? See, at the beginnings of the Society for Useful Manufacturers here in Patterson, they start building the first mill, and the whole thing just collapses. The sum goes bankrupt. And the population had reached somewhere around 1,500. By 1800, there were 43 people left in Patterson. It's basically, the whole project has collapsed. But what you have is a handful of individuals. And this shows you how history works. This is not predetermined. Everybody's dead. Franklin's dead. Washington's dead. These other people are lesser figures. They're not creative, people like Hamilton and these people. Jefferson, Madison. It's not the same thing. Oh, this is just while all this collapsed, there were people that stayed behind, that kept this thing alive. Very important, right? So, the Colts stayed here. Roswell Colt, the son of Peter Colt, came back. Here, the Godwin family, you'll see Godwins, the names around here. This is a very important local American revolutionary patriotic family. This guy, John Clark, very important guy. He had mastered the highest level of technology in weaving and textiles. Came from Scotland through Rhode Island and came here, right? And the first, he set up the Henry Clay Mill. We'll get back to that in 1811. Rogers, who's a carpenter, came here, who becomes important later on. So the point is, there's a handful of people that keep this whole idea alive. And what you have is a leadership that emerges to basically preserve the Republic and perpetuate it. Henry Clay creates the Warhawk Party, which takes the Congress over. Of course, the British burn Washington, D.C. to the ground in 1814. So things don't look so good, okay? And the president, Madison, basically, while the city's burning down, he disappears and runs away with his Dolly Madison. And nobody knows where he is. This guy ends up stepping forward. He's another, and this is the revival of the whole Franklin operation. This is Matthew Carey, an Irish immigrant, who's then brought over here after the Revolution by Franklin to be a publisher to promote these ideas out of Philadelphia. During the Revolution, he ran operations in Ireland against the British to basically harass them while the Revolution was going on here. And what you have is both political parties at this point are just completely, utterly corrupt at the top. Right? The whole idea of Hamilton and the Federalist Papers, it's basically almost virtually doesn't exist in any constitutional form. And he puts out this, and so the British are, like Diane was referencing, the idea is to promote all sorts of internal faction fights, one state against the other, etc., to the degree that within a couple months after the burning, or before, I forget which, of Washington, D.C., or something called the Hartford Convention, and it's a group of guys sitting around saying, okay, yeah, it was fun. You know, we had this little union thing for a while, but we're going to split it up. We're going to break the whole thing up. So there's a plot to just end the whole thing. It's going to be all over. So Carey writes this olive branch, which basically reasserts the principles of the American system. And it becomes I don't know how much of many of these things were printed, but it revives the whole spirit of the Revolution and the American system of economy. But anyway, you have the emergence of Monroe, who basically, when Madison runs away from the capital after being burnt by the British, he's the war secretary, so he steps in and basically says, I'm taking charge. You know, so he becomes the next president. And this extraordinary man on the right, John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams, who really, out of all these guys, in my view, really takes to heart, you know, the passion of the whole project. And I'll just look, this is my favorite quote. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is a speech, very long speech. This is a little part of it he gave on Independence Day of 1821. But look what he says. He's talking about the Declaration of Independence, which look, this is 1821. This is almost 2 generations later. You got to think about this, right? It's like people declare what? You know, this whole thing is almost falling apart. And he says, look, this declaration, what did it do? It was the cornerstone of a new fabric destined to cover the surface of the globe. All right? A nation was born in a day. It stands and must ever stand alone. A beacon on the summit of the mountain to which all the inhabitants of the earth may turn their eyes for a genial and saving light. A light of salvation and redemption to the oppressed. So he gets, this is heavy stuff. He gets it. And there's an offensive around Quincy Adams, Clay, etc. They launch an offensive to restore the American Revolution. As part of it, they bring back Lafayette. Again, you got to think of this. This is almost 2 generations later. So Lafayette, who hasn't been here since the Revolutionary War ended, comes back to the United States and does a whole national tour. And it just sparks a complete revival of the cause of the Revolution, the Constitution, etc. And one of the first places he comes is here. He comes to Paterson. And this is the thing that's on the leaflet. And they have a big parade, a huge celebration. They have a big banquet in this Godwin's Passaic Hotel, which is right downriver there from the falls. Was downriver there from the falls. And he says that he makes a toast to the recollections of Totowa, because then it was still Totowa, and the enjoyments of Patterson. May this happy, populous manufacturing town more and more bear witness to the superiority of Republican institutions and the blessings of freedom, equal rights, and self-government. And what happens is that Matthew Carey, the guy that wrote the Olive Branch, the Franklin Junto Inner Circle guy, reprints Hamilton's report on the subject of manufacturers. Again, you're talking about 30 years. People haven't looked at this kind of stuff in 30 years. So he's reviving the whole thing, and he writes a beautiful introduction. He says that despite all these things that Hamilton went through and the problems he had and the scandals and this and that, he said that this work can justly be considered one of the most splendid practical documents ever produced by the human mind. That's quite an endorsement. So they reprint this, and they revive the whole thing. And one aspect of this, I'll just go to this side, is that you have the creation of the West Point Army Corps, which was a nation-building operation. That was the idea, right? Congress authorized the creation of a Corps of Engineers which shall be stationed at West Point and shall constitute a military academy. And the idea was to build the nation. And one of the things that they do in the spirit of the Federalist and the Constitution and this stuff is Monroe, it's in the Monroe administration, passes the General Survey Act. This is a big deal because this allows the Army Corps guys to carry out projects across state lines. Previously that they could build a canal and then go to the border of that state, and they had to go to the next state and negotiate a whole thing and this and that and go to a private country. Nothing gets done. You build absolutely nothing. And that changed everything. And there was a corps of these guys that did all of these things. Benjamin Wright, that guy in the middle is from France. So all the top guys from France came back over here, the engineers and designers. This is the whole story, of course, in and of itself. But anyway, the point is that the country exploded. We had a revival of the national bank. Public credit was accessible, at least for a few years. Hamilton's idea of a national bank was torn down when the whole project was torn down in 12, right? And it was revived again. I think the second national bank was 18 to 33 or something like that. So you had public credit, so you could build all these things, right? Just like we saw with the Saugus Iron Works in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And so this, of course, goes up to 1860. But you see, you have the entire development of the interior. This is through the canals. And as part of this offensive, the Patriots, a man here in Morristown, New Jersey, named George McCulloch, puts out a pamphlet, starts a political campaign for the Morris Canal, right? And of course, this goes back to this idea of the New Jersey's land bridge into the interior. This is a canal that goes from here, basically, right down to Newark Bay, all the way over to the Delaware, and then into the Lehigh Valley. But look what he says, right? He says the facility with which coal, iron ore, and provisions could be transported in a country full of water powers, right here, would gradually introduce new forges, furnaces, and manufactures of every sort. Patterson might thus become the Birmingham as well as the Manchester of America, and of course the two leading industrial cities of England. So the whole thing is revived. The whole Hamilton project is revived, right? And it is revived. This is just the people that are involved in this Morris. Again, these guys are descendants directly, or in the case of this old guy here, he was a young insider with George Washington. He must have been an old guy back then. And some of these people went on to be also part of the whole development of Patterson here. It's named after Lewis Morris, who, anyway, I don't want to go through all that. So it's completed in 1831. And as part of propagandizing for it, DeWitt Clinton puts out a memorial, which is published and spread throughout New Jersey. Again, you can see what he says, right? He said, we went to New Jersey, we went to New Jersey, we saw foreign iron worked by foreign coal. What's going on here? This is insane. And at the same time, right there, mountains filled with the richest ore, etc. Or we could have, we have them right there in Pennsylvania. So what's up? So he says there are many flourishing institutions in Patterson and other places. As these establishments become more extended, the power of steam will be demanded. Coal will therefore be indispensable, iron ore, steel for the purpose of making and repairing the machinery of those important establishments. So again, referencing Patterson as a fulcrum of this development of a modern, full-set industrial economy. This is the guy that, of course, John Stevens Institute here in New Jersey, who created the first steam engine locomotives. And again, he says the same thing. This is like, every time I hear this, I hear Hamilton, right? He's saying this is the kind of thing we have to have. We have to have railways connecting the country. And then we can indeed say that the states would constitute one family intimately connected and held together in the indissoluble bonds of union. Doesn't that sound like Hamilton or what? Right? Right? It's almost even the same language, right? And this guy is wild. He's got a little train. That's his house. And in the front lawn of his house, he'd have this train that would go around. People would go, "What the hell is that?" You know, and he'd keep this train going around the house. Anyway, that's his first locomotive, steam engine wagon, right? And so this obviously becomes critical. And another guy that's brought in as part of this offensive is this fellow from Germany, List. He has an even more ambitious thing. He says, here's, we're going to develop the whole continent. Right? Ohio's going to be as populous as Pennsylvania. Indiana is Ohio. Illinois is Indiana. Go over to Mississippi. Next, we're going to go to the Rocky Mountains, and then we're going to go to China. And you see what he's saying, right? See, this idea, as Quincy Adams was saying, this has to cover the surface of the globe. Every person has a right to these, to his creative development and these ideas. You have the first major railroad built. I think it's finished, 1831. Again, all these Army Corps guys are involved in it. Just so you can see, it's called the Paterson and Hudson River Railroad. It's kind of straightforward, right? And Patterson goes down here, goes to Newark Bay, you can get to the Hudson River that way. Actually, it's not the Hudson River. I won't get into all that. There's a specific thing with that. But anyway, the point is you got a train that goes from Patterson right down to Newark Bay and New York Bay. At the the groundbreaking of the railroad in 1831, the speech is given by this guy as the president of the railroad, but it could have been really given by anybody. And look what he said. He says, "Who can resist the conclusion that the Patterson and Hudson River Railroad is but the first link of that great chain which is dividing the western part of New York State to its capital? And who will charge me with extravagance if I extend that chain in imagination thousands of miles west, even to the extreme limits of our territory?" Okay? And this is what, 30, almost 40 years later. This is, of course, the linking the Transcontinental Railroad. And see this train there? That's this, the Union Pacific 119, which was built right here. Right here, where we're standing. So, see the vision that these people had. They were not joking around. And so as part of this, Patterson just explodes. It actually does become what Hamilton designed, except it's not a federal city. So these raceways are developed further. That's the whole thing in itself. This is the first, this is a you are here. You are here, right here. That's where you are right now, right? And this is the raceways. This is the first Rogers Works. These buildings, 1832. Anyway, so it becomes the Birmingham. That's today, and the raceway traced in. Oh, this is Rogers Locomotive Works about 40 years later, 50 years later. Again, we're right here in that building. That's the train out front, and of course by this time we had these big steam machines now, so you didn't need the water so much and stuff. That's the Corliss steam engine. They could run these big machines and produce these locomotives, and they produced them like crazy. The whole thing was, in fact, you had this whole area here, from right here, Market Street, the foot of Market Street, all the way up the next block. Here, see that? Over here. Right, this is Market Street. This is called Locomotive Alley. And you had one of the most dense production of locomotive trains anywhere on the planet, except maybe Bolton in Philadelphia. You had Rogers, where we're standing right now. Grant Locomotive Works right across the street. Danforth and Cook. There's a little building here with a thing that says Danforth on it. But you can imagine what this was like, coming in, just boom, bustling. every skilled person from all over the country coming in to work on the machining. If you know anything about locomotives, you got to be really precise in building these things. They're extraordinary machines, and you have to service them also, right? And of course, this is the map of the indissoluble bonds of union. Here, this is the neat little thing. You have the canals. Okay, that's canals. That's the railroads. More railroads. Kind of real quick, but it goes real fast. But isn't that amazing? Then you have airlines. Then I think this one. I think that's the interstate highway system, and then more airlines. So that's the indissoluble bonds of union. But that's literally what these guys were out to do. This is just a good, very short.
A vast railway grid stretching from ocean to ocean reinforced the internal sovereignty of the nation and secured independence from any external sea power. In this way, the United States became the first continental sovereign nation-state to establish itself on the map in the entire span of recorded history. The international consequences of America's achievement precipitated rapidly. Just as Carey had foreseen, the popularity of the American system spread throughout the globe as other nations perceived its successful thwarting of the British Empire. Nations such as Germany, Russia, and Japan underwent rapid development.
All right, so this is post-Civil War, of course, in the United States, and everybody wants to get on the action. He said, "Gee, this is tremendous." This is what Diane was referencing, the Centennial, first Centennial in 1876. And people came in for this for all over the world, and they were just astounded at what had been developed here. This is the opening ceremonies. This is in Fairmount Park in Philadelphia, for those of you familiar with Philadelphia. They're just refurbishing this building right now, or they were anyway, a couple of years ago. And you had this Corliss steam engine that was on display. People looking at this, right? Agriculture exhibition, Smithsonian, printing. I mean, they had pavilions for virtually everything. The first head of state finally visited the United States. You realize it wasn't until 1876 when a head of state finally came here. They were, everybody was too afraid of the, ramifications of the British Empire, right? So finally you had the president of Brazil come here. He's standing there with Grant under the big engine, right? But people, people saw this and said, my God, we want this. We don't want to be slave colonies or opium producers. We want this. This is what we want. So it becomes infectious. The Promethean idea, right, becomes infectious. This is an extraordinary painting I'd never seen before. I don't even know where it is. It's called Men of Progress. It was painted by a Swiss guy before this, 1862, during our Civil War. And it's got in there all these great inventors. And they're all contemporaries of each other. And this is what America was known as, right? These are the pioneers of industry, science, electricity. Samuel Colt's in here. He's there. He was the cousin of the original Roswell Colt that built Paterson and created the Paterson Colts that are here. Became famous in winning the West, right? You have Samuel Morse, his telegraph. You have these little inventions. That's some kind of a loom, I think. I don't know. There's some kind of engine here. You have, what's his name is in here? Let's see it. Is Art Murphy here? Joe Henry, yeah. That's it.
Who's the portrait?
What?
Who's the portrait in the back?
Oh, that's what I'm glad you pointed that out. And there you have, of course, overseeing the entire thing, Benjamin Franklin. Right? So it's like they bring this whole thing back to life again with some kind of a science experiment. But this is what this is who we are. This is what we're known as. And as part of this tradition that has developed over centuries, really, there's certain we just take these things for granted, right? You take for granted. You walk anywhere in the country and take a letter and put it in the thing, and it's going to go and it's going to get there. All right. Well, why take that for granted? That was a creation of Benjamin Franklin, right? That's part of this idea of unifying a nation, indissoluble bonds of union. Public libraries. That's not obvious. That's what's under attack right now. They're shutting down all the public libraries. You don't want people reading books, then they'll become like Prometheus or something. God, you wouldn't want that. Local police protection. That's part of ensured domestic tranquility, right? You have to order in local communities, make sure that nothing gets out of hand, et cetera. You don't want gangs coming in and taking over your cities, sponsored by the British Empire or something. Well, that's what they do, right? Volunteer fire department. All these things were pioneered in Philadelphia. Public high schools came later, but it was Franklin's great grandson, Alexander Dallas Bache, that set up the first high school, free public high school, right, in Philadelphia. And I'll show this is a video I made about a month ago. So.
Hold on, Pichardo.
Today's a sad day in the city of Patterson when my police force will be less than 125 police officers and families. And what we must understand the impact of 125 police officers.
Here we are today.
Are you worried about crime?
I certainly am, and my citizens. I speak on behalf of constituents, and they're fearful. A lot of senior citizens here, and this is almost like a worst-case scenario where your taxes have gone up, and you're going to get fewer services as a result. So they're going to be paying much more to receive much less.
What about business?
Yeah, fired. And but thank God, because Alexander Hamilton lives. And that's Diane in front of the Great Falls. And you can see this video on the LaRouche PAC site, issuing her declaration of war against the British system. And that's Diane at the City Council in Patterson. There's Diane here in front of the locomotive train. That's at the City Council. So we're bringing the whole thing back to life, and that's what we're fighting for. So it's not about 125 guys and their families that have been laid off. This is about really almost a sacred tradition, a mission to bring this idea, this Promethean idea, to not just the United States, but to the entire world. So that's the deal.